Okay. So if I take a sponge and I dip it into a glass of red Kool-Aid, pull it out.
It's gonna absorb the red Kool-Aid.
But what happens when I squeeze it?
It drains it out.
What comes out of it?
The red Kool-Aid.
Oh. Right? If it's green Kool-Aid, what comes out of it? So whatever it is a sponge absorbs
is what it gives out.
Is what it gives out. I want you to think of the human soul like that. You can only give what you got. Right? You can only, right? You are a product of what you're exposed to. So the subject matter of family matters, right? Mental health, right? And then saying, okay, well, there's these things that's compromising our mental well-being, and the environment that experiences the most intense interaction with that lack of mental well-being is in weird, the family, right? So if I'm exposing myself to substances, if I'm exposing myself to environments, if I'm exposing myself or being exposed to environments that's unhealthy, substances that's unhealthy, right? Then when I squeeze out from myself, where's that squeezing going to go to? It's going right back to your family. Now, that's for us as adults. Now, let's take it to the most purest sponge amongst us, which are children. And the reason why I say the most purest sponge amongst us, because as adults, we can actually process with a filter, right? Our frontal cortex has actually been developed in a way to where information comes in and we're processing and we're reasoning, right? We're negotiating. Some people argue that the level of maturity is to the degree that you determine and you can regulate how much the world influences you. You can never stop the world from influencing you. But maturity, right, a mature adult, right, has gotten a healthy governance over how the world influences them. Meaning their intellectual process, right, is actually regulating, right, how information comes in, how information goes out, how things impact them, right, where they choose to go, where they choose not to go, what they choose to be exposed to, what they choose not to be exposed to, what mechanisms inside of them is going to be activated when they're exposed to something that they didn't want to be exposed to, right? That's a level of maturity, right? Not to say that people are immature if they don't have that regulation, but at some level, we all got a level of immaturity, right? About ourselves, right? We're not fully developed, right? We're still in work in progress. What we want to talk about is the sponge. And the reason why we want to talk about the sponge, we want to use this word exposure. When you walk out of this little 20-minute session right here, I want to hopefully encourage you to walk away comfortably using the word exposure and knowing that every human experience is exposing you to something and you're exposing it to something. And as you begin to interact with your children, interact with your family, interact with your colleagues, right, whatever you got going on, right, you're exposing them to it. And whatever they got going on, they're exposing you to it, right? And when you start talking about vulnerable populations are the least capable of being able to regulate how the world is actually influencing them and exposing to them, right? We're gonna watch a video real quick. I had an actual great activity. Actually, I might still be able to do the activity, but I only got 15 minutes. I'm gonna explain to you the activity. I had a yawn and I had a nice little story, right? And what I was gonna share with you was how in this story, this young lady named Melissa, who was a little girl, had two parents. And one of her and one parent had a child. She was a young lady. She had her first child at age 19. And the male parent, he was 27. He had an actual son already that was 6. Then he had the second child with the actual first parent, Carla. I'll tell you the story, right? Any case, they worked a nice little job. Everything was well. They were a stable family. They had their grandparents there, at least his grandparents. Her parents wasn't around. They raised both of the children. Everything went copacetic, was good for like 7 years. And all of a sudden, right, Michael was the gentleman's name. He had an encounter with employment and he had to get another job. So he had to move about 4 or 5 hours away from their normal location. And when he went into this new location 5 hours away, because he was starting a new job, he found himself having to work longer hours. And he also felt he had to deal with a lot more dynamics, new relationships. So there's a lot more stress, right? A lot more competitive type of dynamics inside the workplace. So he was coming home a little bit different than when he was coming home when he was living inside the normal hometown environment. The children was wrestling with, going to school and kind of figuring it out. But Carla, right, she was pretty much with no family, no friends, in a new environment. And she was kind of having some challenges with coping with that, right? So one thing I didn't mention was that, I got the story written down, but Melissa, when she was born healthy, but both Carla and Michael was put inside of an actual open case for Child Protective Services because she had tested for marijuana use, right? So it was just marijuana, but she was pregnant. So how it usually works when that happens, when that baby is born, Child Protective Services come and they have to actually prove to them that you're not doing drugs, not putting the children at risk. So they was able to go through that process successfully, right? But clearly she had some things inside of her body that she consumed, and although it impacted Carla, it didn't necessarily have a long-lasting impact on Carla, right? Or I call it Melissa. So in any case, Carla later on, when she's inside her environment, she's by herself, she's isolated, her husband's working longer hours, she's a little bit stressed out, she don't have friends to connect with, no new environment, she's just kind of doing the mom thing, right? You know what I'm saying? Wife thing, but she's not really getting the actual husband thing back because he's working quite a bit. So she's like, okay, well, what the heck with it? I'm gonna drink a little bit of alcohol, right? So she starts to drink. She actually was drinking beforehand as an alternative to actual marijuana, but now it went from recreational drinking to she began to drink more heavily because this was how she was entertaining herself, right? If I'm gonna be bored and cleaning the house, I'd rather be buzzed doing it, right? So wake up in the morning, I'm gonna drink a little bit more often. To the point to where if you combine the stress, right, of her actual environment and the fact that her husband wasn't coming home, right, you know what I'm saying, the way he normally did, she began to drink even more and began to become agitated. So now, in this environment, keep in mind, I want you to keep in mind the focus is on Melissa, right? Mom is agitated, she's drinking, she's a little frustrated with the husband. So the husband's coming home from working long hours, making sure all the bills are taken care of, and he's wondering why he got this type of woman, right, that's on his head, that's mad, angry, and also drinking all the time. So he starts to get discontent with his environment and finds himself inside of a situation at work that he probably shouldn't have been in the first place with another woman, right? Carla finds out, right? Big explosion, tried to hurt herself, harm herself physically, you know what I'm saying, feeling completely distraught about the situation, right? Keep in mind, Melissa's exposed to all this. By this time, it's a little bit later in years, the young brother, I think I called him John, he actually developed some friends and whatnot. He was a little bit older, 13, 14 years old, so he was going out, you know what I'm saying, being outside the home. He had developed some relationships where he was actually staying overnight to some of his friends' homes. Well, on this one particular night when this big explosion happened between mother and father, and it was getting ready to go down, and John kind of understood that because mom just caught, Pop's cheating and it's not going to be good. He decided that he's going to take Melissa and they're going to go actually stay at a friend's house. But for some reason on this particular day, all the friends that he would have actually been available to actually have stay the night over, parents wasn't going to allow his sister to stay over there. So he had to find an actual home where he can actually allow his sister to stay where there was no barriers with a parent. Because he don't want to tell the parents that, oh, my mom and dad is fighting or whatnot. So he has to find a way to make it make sense why his sister is staying with him overnight. So he goes to a friend's house where no parents are there because they work in the middle of the night. So it's just him, John, the guy, and his little sister. Unfortunately, the little sister gets molested in that evening, right? It takes about a week. She begins to, clearly have some symptoms of having some serious problems. She finally exposes that this is what happened. Super explosion happens, eventually translates to Carla and Melissa leaving, going back home. The father goes through a whole process. He ends up getting remarried. The son stays with him. When they go back home, Melissa gets support from the father's grandparents, really deep connections. She kind of reiterates herself. So the whole story is about a story of an actual young girl in which she's exposed to in her environment. And what I was going to do is in this story, we were going to take a yarn, and I was going to have each person read a section, and then we were going to throw a yarn to determine if this was an actual positive or negative experience, right? And if it was a positive experience, it would have been a green yarn. And if it was a negative experience, it would have been a red yarn. And over time, we'd have been standing up here inside of a group circle, and you would literally see the brain of Melissa, right, expressing to you whether or not she has an overwhelming number of actual green, right, pathways of synapses, right, you know what I'm saying, neurological pathways of communication, are overwhelmingly red. Overwhelmingly green suggests that she has a resilient, right, empowered brain. Overwhelmingly red suggests that that brain has been traumatized and harmed. Now, can anyone tell me what they know about synapses and how they work? Anybody. It's okay if you don't know it. It's, not something. You can rewire them. Actually, so to rewire suggests is that they have to be first wired a certain type of way, right? So I like the word wired because you use it kind of creates this type of the pathways, right? And you can redirect those pathways, right? Can you play the video on the synapses? We'll give us a snapshot, the image. I want y'all to get this image.
As for every single one of us, learning something new means rearranging the way our brain works. Our brain has an astonishing 100 billion neurons, or brain cells, all connected together. Learning is about creating and strengthening pathways through these neurons for impulses of electricity. But between each and every connection in our brains, there's a tiny gap called a synapse. For any of us to learn something new, the electrical signal has to jump across this gap to continue its journey.
Okay, pause it right here. Okay. So he said that every time you learn something new, there's this gap that has to be crossed in order for you to build this. And he's going to tell you, and he's going to show you this very profound video, right? That initial process is the most difficult process. But the more frequently, right, that you travel that particular pathway, the more easy, right, it becomes to actually get to your destination. I want y'all to get this piece. That's whether positive or negative.
So you can have a highway to the negative, or you can have a highway to the positive.
And if the highway that's traveled to the positive is traveled frequently, then that's how the actual natural ecosystem inside the brain operates. It takes the least path of resistance. It goes there first. If it's negative, it does what? It goes there first. So hence, you can have a situation that takes place where it requires a certain type of response that's maybe at a level of 1 to 10, maybe a 3 on average, right? Someone comes into the room right now and jumps aside here and be like, man, we're in the community here, like, man, hey, what's going on with y'all? They're like looking at us crazy. Like, it can happen. I'm saying it's Dakota House, right? Someone in this room would look and be like, bro, you need anything? You good? You straight? Right? And we don't even know the person, right? But someone else can be completely true. What are you talking about? What? Yeah. They're at a different level because their pathway, right, has been traveled, right, with that type of response more frequently. They're turned at a higher level, right, of actual engagement with that pathway. Watch how it's built, though. This dude did a brilliant job of breaking down how it's built. I want to connect this. And when he shifts over here, I want you guys to shift your brain back from individual to a community central nervous system. Right? So the same way we're going to learn how the individual brain operates with pathways. Everybody tell me, what are the 2 things we measure inside of our work? Community cohesion and collective efficacy. I want you to think about community cohesion being the connectivity. I want you to think about efficacy and what he's going to do when he built this pathway. And I want you to think about if a community, just like an individual, has built a pathway of negative responses repetitively in a particular type of way that produces a certain behavior, violence, right? Self-medicating, right? Environment of actual mental health, poor mental health, right? Which is basically behavioral health. People interacting with each other in an unhealthy way. If a community, just like an individual, has built through exposure pathways that makes it easier to travel along the most unhealthiest route. Rewiring, Sister Heather said, right? You can rewire just simply by what? Redirecting of use. It's a simple usage thing. If I stop using that pathway and I use this pathway more frequently, then this becomes irrelevant and this becomes relevant. That's the rewiring process. So the same thing that has to happen with the individual, the same thing you're going to see him build within the individual, right, central nervous system, that one synapse is the same thing that we have to consciously do. We have to bring the science into what we do on a community level. And it's one word and one word alone that actually determines the success of that. And that word is relationships. Relationships. I don't care what it is that you're dealing with. The human being is empowered, right, by healthy, wholesome relationships. And the human being is most disempowered by unhealthy, non-holistic relationships. But anyway, I want y'all to look at the synapse you're going to build, but I want you to imagine, wow, imagine if it was a brain of a community and we was building this synapse. Go.
The gap between the two brain cells is tiny, but that doesn't mean it's straightforward for a signal to get from one side to the other. For us, it's like crossing a deep ravine. And getting from one side to the other should tell us something about the way we learn. The first time a signal crosses from one brain cell to the other demands the most effort, and it's the same when we cross our ravine. The first trip across it is the hardest. Having crossed the ravine once, the journeys across get easier and easier. And a similar thing happens when we learn something.
Okay, pause it. Okay, so learning is the efficacy. The connection was the wire from one side of the actual mountain connected to the other side of the mountain. That was the connection. But then he said learning. This same science, right, that they're talking about regarding the actual way the actual synapses works is the exact way that they actually talk about, right, education. How to actually train and how to develop, children in actual adult education. How to work, repetition, right? Even writing things down, right? Using art, finding creative ways to transmit this knowledge and build this education. The same thing they use for educating is the same science they use for articulating even trauma and how to actually rewire, right? This trauma, right? But so I want you to put in your mind, he made the connection, now he about to build. He could not have been able to build without the connection. Right? He would have been sitting over on one side of the cliff talking to the other side and been no connection whatsoever, like, how I'm gonna get over there. But once he put that wire over there, right, he had an opportunity. Right? Keep going.
To start with, learning is difficult. As the signal crosses the gap between the brain cells again and again, we establish a more solid pathway. Sorry about that. By the time we've made the crossing over and over again, it becomes effortless. We can do it whenever we like.
In reality, the brain does it, right, every opportunity it can.
We finally learned something.
So that's how a skill set is built, right? In the same way you can build a skill set or a tool to be able to actually achieve a goal. For instance, you become a mechanic or you begin to be able to build something, or you use how to use we went out, me and Benji and the Timbuktu, team, we went out and dealt with larger machines, right? Our first time building the machine, he was up in there jerking and, if we would have been on that thing, for multiple days, multiple hours, we'd be probably driving it, being able to pick up rocks and little small pencils and whatnot with the machine, because we get familiar with it. The brain develops an actual familiarity and a capacity with it. In the same way that that can be built, right, you can also build and you can also shift behaviors. What's my point? At the end of the day, we're exposed to things, and those things are coming in to us on a daily basis. Communities are exposed to things, and those things are coming to the community on a daily basis. Our job is to help them understand what they're being exposed to and how it's actually impacting them, right? Once they understand that, sometimes that's the first thing and the most important thing you can actually do, is to simply say, you do acknowledge, like for instance, we talked about drugs, right? Some people actually self-medicate, right? In the story of Melissa, she was smoking marijuana, and she wasn't drinking alcohol. When she got tested and it found that she was smoking marijuana while she was pregnant, Child Protective Services were inside of her business. She had the risk of losing her children, so what did she do? She stopped smoking marijuana. But she started doing what? Recreationally drinking what? Alcohol. It's legal. She was still breastfeeding though. So technically she was still putting the baby at risk because she was breastfeeding, but it wasn't illegal to do so, right? But she needed that in her mind for some purpose. So she chose to do one thing that was socially or maybe even chemically, who knows? That's still out the debate right now. We know for sure alcohol is worse than marijuana. We can say that, right? But chemically it's harmful to the child, right? But it's not as harmful to the child because you can't lose your children for drinking alcohol. You can lose your child for smoking, right? So she adjusted. But later on, that same thing that she adjusted to became actually a harm to her because she began to do it habitually, and it became something that she actually began to need and began to change her behaviors. In these communities, right, there's certain things that they're doing that they're actually coping with, and it's not causing problems. And then in the same sense, some of those same things that they're doing, right, during certain times become the number one reason why there are problems. For instance, alcohol for general. How many of us in our communities or people that you work with, can you have an honest conversation with them and actually explore whether or not alcohol is a negative or an actual positive thing inside their lives and the lives of people around them? It's almost a conversation you can't have unless somebody's a bona fide alcoholic, right? Unless a person's a bona fide alcoholic and it's clearly a problem, everybody else, you can't tell them that you can't have a barbecue, a gathering with cats not pulling out beers, drinks, and kicking it and hanging out. That's a natural part of the environment. Even though some of the elders say, I ain't going up over there, them fools get the drinking, and right? Some people, I ain't going up over there, they get the drinking, and somebody going, or they say, you know how such and such is, he can't handle no liquor, he can't hold his liquor. We'll say that, right? But you would never have a negative conversation about the liquor. It's about the person not being able to hold it. But inside of our same communities, right, alcohol is easily available, right? Increasingly more available. And again, this is not an attack on alcohol, I'm just giving an example. So the connection is to being able to first have a conversation and get them in a place where our community and the individuals will say, you know what, that may be a problem, right? Now, getting them to accept that it's a serious problem and something they need to do to change is going to be like building that cliff, right? You're going to be walking across, almost stumbling, right? You're going to have to go back, you're going to get some help, right? But eventually over time, because you established the what? The connection, right? And you took your time, you problem solved, right? And you preserve the connection. Without preserving that connection, you can't what? You can't build. And that's really the message we want to actually say. You can only give, right, what you've been given, right? So if you've been given trauma, if you've been given dysfunction, if you've been given, anyone has been given these things, if they're not being helped to go in and process and understand, redirect, as Sister Heather said, rewire, right? Then you can't expect the behavior to change. But if you can get them to acknowledge, you know what, maybe this is a problem. For instance, one of the biggest taboos nowadays is people don't want to talk about mental health. I'm going to tell you off top. Sakota, I was getting ready to put a cold public health campaign out, really encouraging individuals to talk more and be comfortable with, right? Addressing, to me, poor mental health is just as significant and just as relevant as actual good mental health. It's the state of your mind. And we need to be able to have that discussion. And we need to be able to eradicate this notion that somehow, right, I should feel bad about myself because I feel bad. That's not that person's problem. That's a societal problem. That's a cultural problem. So we have to shift that, right? On a community level. So what's the first thing you have to do? You have to make the connection. How are we gonna make the connection? Right? Through making people more aware. Right? Once we get them to say, you know what? Yeah, he's right, bro. They may not want to go through a therapist. They may not want to come and have an actual intimate conversation with you. Right? But if you can get them to say, you know what? Yeah, he's right, man. Like we do be kind of treating people bad that, you know what I'm saying, we think, you know what I'm saying, going to a psychiatrist or, you know what I'm saying, they got mental health problems. If you can get them to acknowledge that, then over time, we can begin to rebuild, right, and actually rewire or reshape the narrative. So again, you can't give, I can't give, we can't give nothing other than what we've been already given, right? So now we have to ask ourselves, so what are we giving each other, right? And I'm hoping that inside this conversation over the next, you know, few hours, because we have some time today and tomorrow, that we begin to have the courage when we leave from here to have the honest conversations about these things, right? All drugs are not bad. All alcohol is not bad. And I'm saying that as a Muslim, and no alcohol can I drink unless I'm on my deathbed on the verge of starving. I can drink alcohol from starving. I'm on my deathbed, right? But I can't drink alcohol. But I'm going to say, in a society where there's different morals and different standards or whatnot, alcohol is not all bad, right? Everybody got their own standards or whatnot. For some people, it's okay, right? But the fact that it's legal, the fact that it's socially normal, is a problem, right? It's unregulated, right? It's this enemy inside the house that no one wants to acknowledge. It's an enemy, right? It could be a friend, but because we don't see the potential for it to be an enemy, right? Or we don't want to acknowledge that it can be an enemy, it becomes an enemy. Same thing with drugs. Look at pharmaceutical drugs, some of the biggest dope dealers, right? Hands down. Our doctors, right, are some of the actual biggest connects to the dope dealers, right? That's what they're going to give you, some drugs, right? And oftentimes those drugs can translate to actual addictions that then translate to other forms of harm where individuals go out and get drugs that's available in the streets. So I don't want to belabor as much. We have an awesome conversation related to actual digital determinants of health that's going to be coming up right after me. But I'm hoping everybody got the point related to actual exposure, right? When you start translating exposure to those things that's going to actually activate pathways in your brain. When you're dealing with community members, what they're exposed to is activating pathways within their brain that then develops into actual behaviors. And when you see certain people behave in a certain type of way, it's because what they've been conditioned, socialized, and exposed to, right? And it's not a dirty thing, right? But it's a thing that you once understand, you begin to say, you know what? Let's see if we can get them connected to some other stuff. Simple solutions. Expose them to other things. Which is the reason why sometimes a hug and a nice smile is one of the most amazing things you can do for people. Is there any questions before we wrap? I hope that was pretty straightforward. Synapses, exposure, right? Looking at it from the individual and down to the community. The same thing we do with the individual, same thing we do with the community. Most people that have been in our training, they know that narrative is pretty straightforward. But the conversation today was exposure. Everybody good?